Well, everyone, thank you for joining us. I am Pastor Megan Rohrer, and I am sitting in the traditional and unceded lands of the Ohlone people here in San Francisco. And for all of you who are joining us, if you are on Zoom, wherever you gather, I hope you'll take a second and acknowledge the land on which you dwell. If you need a little orientation to the Zoom webinar, notice that Gerry and I will have video and voice, and you will not, so that we can center the voices that we are trying to listen to today, and also to try to decrease opportunities for folk who are trying to disrupt conversations like these. If you are on Zoom and you would like to chat with others, introduce yourself, put up links to books you think are wonderful, you can do that in the chat section. If you would like to lift up a question for Gerry, you can do so by typing it in the Q&A. If you are watching our live stream on Facebook, you can lift up questions or comments by using hashtag #LutheransListen or by just typing them in the comment field. And I will be moderating both. The other thing that I wanted to let you know is that this video will be available archived. You can find it at justlutheran.com following this conversation, or you can find it on my Facebook page. And if you would like to share it with others in your faith community, you are welcome to do so. And I also want to mention out loud that the Holy Spirit works in mysterious ways, meaning technical issues might happen at some point in the middle of this town hall. That is to be expected in the nature of times like these. But we also want to give permission to all who are speaking today, given the fact that it can be hard to speak in a forum like this, particularly when it's recorded and kind of frozen in time in an archive, to give Gerry the benefit of the doubt that what she is saying comes from her heart and is centered in aloha, and to remember that Gerry is speaking as an individual, not necessarily representing people beyond herself. And with that, I would like to have one of my favorite people of all time introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gerry Ebalaroza-Tunnell, and I am actually located in Bothell, Washington, which is just a suburb of Seattle, on the indigenous lands of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Snoqualmie tribe, Snohomish tribe. So thank you so much. I enjoy being here in this forum. This forum's so different, though, you know what I mean? But
yeah, you're not used to speaking to churchy kind of communities, but you are used to me slightly. And if you haven't figured it out at the beginning of this, Gerry and I adore each other, and so we will be speaking in conversation with love. And part of the reason that I invited Gerry to speak in this venue is because we've had other speakers who maybe could cue into the specifics of church communities before. One of the things that we've heard from some of the voices of folk that we have listened to, particularly the BIPOC folk, is that helping people kind of figure out their own personal path to ways that they can decrease bias is really important, particularly for people who are from privileged spaces, like my people who come from Switzerland. But you occupy work that both is able to kind of name that people have their own individual work to do with their own ancestors, and you work within an institution. So you work in a school district seeking to try to help that institution be better. And so I love that you hold both of those worlds, and I'm hoping that some of the insights that you can offer will help us as we navigate that truth that it really is our own individual work to do, and we really long to change some systems. Will you tell people about your consulting work that you do?
Yes, so I am the principal consultant of Co3 Consulting, which is stand for Co-Creating Cohesive Communities. And so I basically I go out and I help organizations and individuals, you know, just to lay the foundation to begin talking about, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that's kind of like what I do with Co3 Consulting. And then I'm also the director of equity for the Mukilteo School District as well too. And so it's a, you know, I mean, the work that I do, a lot of times when people hear about being the director of equity, sometimes people can get confused between equity and equality. And, you know, with everything that's happening in our world right now, with the, you know, just with the discourse that's continuously perpetuating the injustices, I feel that the way that I lead my work, and, you know, I lead it with aloha and with my heart, that this is a time for us to actually, I think, to honor the moment, honor this space, because this is where transformation begins, right? It's like we're all so uncomfortable with everything that's happening in our life, right? That it's like, oh, we want to get out, but I feel like, ooh, this is the time for us to just take it all in. And yeah, so that's kind of what I do with walking in both worlds. I'm like a butterfly. I just transform where I go.
I love that. Well, and if you are a part of a congregation or some sort of group that has thought about doing some of this anti-racism or anti-bias work, and you've thought, but how are we going to do this? And you've wondered if you should create your own curriculum, or you don't know people who could come and be speakers for you. Part of this town hall series is listening to really great voices, and the other part is making it impossible for people to say they don't know who they could call anymore, because they literally could email you, right?
Yes, yes, please do, please do.
I'll put your info up for folk.
Okay, make sure that it's the right email, okay? Just kidding.
I'd put your website up and your Facebook up so that they could contact you through those. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
You're so cool.
So would you be willing to speak a little bit about the ways that the intersections that you embody shape the way that you are present in the world?
Yes, absolutely. So I think when I think about the intersections, being cisgender, heteronormative, Pacific Islander, mixed female, I think about how I walk in these spaces, right, with these different intersections. And I really do think that sometimes, depending on the narrative that is playing out in society, the way that my intersections show up is differently. So for example, back in the 1980s, I have my two boys, right? It's like now they're 34 and 35. But when they were like 3 and 4 years old, my ex-husband was in the Navy, right? And at that time, women weren't going into the Navy. And being a woman, I shouldn't have, women didn't belong in the military. And that's a narrative that was going on, at least within my household. And so I needed to disrupt that right away, because my boys were growing up and I didn't want them to feel like there was a certain place where women belong. So I joined the Navy, right?
You really take this training stuff all the way, don't you? I love it.
I joined the Navy because I wanted to make sure that my boys saw that, oh, this person said that mom shouldn't be in the Navy, and my mom was like, you know what, fuck you. I mean, here I am.
You're absolved. You're absolved. It's fine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then now, because there's everything that's happening in our society with the racial injustices, now I'm an angry brown woman, right? Every time that I speak up for justice, I sometimes can get shut down because I'm looked at as just an angry brown woman. So it's all of these, these intersections I feel for myself, that it changes according to different narratives.
And I've heard you answer this question before, but I think it would be great for the people who listen here. But so you identify as mixed, which
Yes.
isn't language that everyone uses. Would you tell people why it's the language you use?
It's because it's what I grew up with, right? It's like Hawaiian, Chinese, Filipino, Spanish, and Portuguese, that I was mixed. I didn't realize that now it's like when people hear mix, it's automatically mixed with white. Now, I never considered, this is how naive I was when I started to, racially identify. In Hawaii, I was just a local girl from Hawaii, right? That's pretty much it. When I came to the mainland, I was put into the category of Hispanic, Black, or white. And I couldn't fit in any of those boxes until someone, tried to force me into a box. I couldn't fit anywhere. And so it's like I can, in being in these ambiguous spaces of identity, yeah, it's like it changes. I lost my train of thought. I forgot where I was going with that. Anyway, I got excited.
No, for me, that was a really profound insight when you shared with me that part of the reason that the word mixed has been so problematic is people always assume it's based off of white, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it's like if you had a paint bucket and you dropped in some colors, that's the assumption of what it
Yes.
meant. When for you, that was not what it meant. It just meant that
That I
you
had
like
all
a
these...
sweater that was beautifully knit together from all of these different cultures,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, so the way that I come into the world, the way that I come into things, it's different, right? I mean, it's different for everyone because we have our own understanding of where we grew up and everything that we learned. So, for example, it's a microaggression when someone asks, "Where are you from?" No, where are you really from, right? That's considered a microaggression. To me, it was a form of courtesy. It was a form of relationship. Because for me, asking someone where you're from, especially on the island, when I ask first where you're from, it determines what island are you from. No, where are you really from determines what street you're from. No, really, really, where are you from determines like what school you went to. And within those 3 times of asking these questions, we can actually figure out that we're probably related somehow along the way, or we have friends in common, right? And so it's like, that's kind of when someone told me when I asked them where they were from that I was a microaggressor, to me, I was like, wait, what? No, I'm not. And then now I see even when people are getting into the conversation around bias, around race, I have to be able to meet them where they're at because I remember where I was. And so, and I don't want to be mistreated. I mean, I didn't like that feeling, and why would I want anybody else to feel that as way too? So yeah, just one of the ways that I move around this earth.
Well, and that's a really good lesson too, is like you could say, I'm in charge of equity. I don't need to learn how to do equity. Like that could be a stance that you take in the world, but your way of being in the world is to try to always continuously figure out how you can be collecting and connecting people and
Right.
also like honoring what's around you. And so that's something that I really appreciate about your particulars. You're a lifelong learner in a lot of ways. Will you tell people what your PhD dissertation is that you're steeped in the middle of? You don't have to go super deep, but just like the topic, because I think people will be interested.
It's the evolution of aloha, an indigenous framework on being in community with each other. And so with the evolution of aloha, a lot of time, I mean, when I ask people if they've heard of the word aloha, everyone's like, "Yay, I know aloha." And then when I ask, "What does aloha mean?" they're like, "It means love. It means and it does, right? It's like aloha means love, hello, goodbye, compassion, grace, empathy. It means all of that. But in my dissertation, what I've done is I've evolved that word into meaning 2 words. Alo meaning front, forward facing, like what you and I are doing right now, and ha meaning breath. And so when we're engaging in dialogue like this, we're exchanging breath. And if breath is a source of life, then we should actually honor the space in which we engage in conversation and also be responsible and accountable to how we share our breath, how we share our words. Because even though a lot of times I can hear, people say, "I'm sorry," you can say you're sorry, but the pain is still going to be there for other people, right? You can say I'm sorry for the words, but you can never take them back. And so the evolution of aloha is the sacredness of dialogue, of conversation. And for me, it's having this kind of conversation based on aloha is the only way that we can talk about the things that is dividing our country right now. And if we're able to just like see each other for who we are and be able to engage in dialogue, I think we would find more in common than we do difference. So that's my dissertation in a nutshell.
Well, and you moved me to tears talking about it. I don't know if you can tell by seeing me, because this whole morning I've been lamenting because of how terrible the air quality is. And I've been thinking deeply about those sacred references within my faith tradition that say that God comes to us through the breath of life. And what does it mean if those metaphors for how God comes to us in life is like super polluted and yucky right now? And so this idea of connecting to our breath that is like these sacred conversations, it just moved me. So I'm grateful for you for reshaping again that metaphor for me, and on a day that I was having a downtime.
Oh,
I know. Love you so much.
I love you too.
So as people are thinking about how, so the way that we've kind of shaped these conversations, because we're in a phase of these town halls now where we're trying to think about best practices, right? And so I'm wondering if we'll talk in different ways about how people can decrease bias, starting with individual ways people can decrease bias. Then we'll talk about as local faith communities or congregations, and then as the larger systemic ways of being faith communities. Would you talk a little bit about some of the things people can do individually?
Well, I think for individuals, the first thing that we need to do to decrease bias is to first become aware of our bias, right? A lot of times people have our implicit and our explicit biases, and there's biases that we don't even know that it's a bias until someone else tells us. So we just know what we know. But then once we know, if we do it again, then we're choosing to. That's when it becomes a problem. So I think it's being aware of your bias. And once you become aware of your bias, then you can actually change that. Because with bias, that's how stereotypes are made up of, right? Stereotypes are made up of all of these biases. And then what happens is that it shapes the way we look at each other and the way that we treat one another. And then it turns into microaggressions and micro insults and micro assaults. And then it just becomes a mess. And so I think for individuals, the first thing to do is to be aware of your bias, to acknowledge that we all have bias, and to make the concerted effort and you know, to not change the bias, but to be aware of our bias. That's the first thing that we need to do.
I just posted for people in the chat box the link to the Harvard Explicit Bias Test, because you can literally take a test to discover your implicit biases.
Yes. Oh, and I've taken that, and I've taken it over and over again, and it's like it's pretty amazing. Yep. That's a good one. Good resource. You're such a good researcher. You must be like a doctor or something and a PhD candidate. And
Yeesh. If you brag on me this much, I'm gonna brag on you. The kindness comes back around again.
I just think you're so amazing. That's all.
Thank you, Gerry. There was another thing that you were interested in talking about for individuals, wasn't there?
Okay.
Yeah.
The way that I think the way that I share things is, you know, you can learn things through stories, right? There's lessons through the stories that we share. And can I share the story about how you and I met? Okay. So that was like 5 or 6 years ago, when we were in San Francisco in Pacifica and our doctoral program, and it was our first one. It was our first intensive that we were there together. And I was sitting there in the front, and I was excited because I was into this doctorate program, and I was in Pacifica. I was right on the ocean. Everything about me was just vibrating right. So I was excited that I wanted to celebrate. And I was hooting and hollering and clapping and everything and making all of this loud noise. And someone on the other side was like, you all, yes, stop. You were holding your ears and then you explained what was happening to you with all of that noise. And my idea or my perspective of you was, oh my gosh, that person is a party pooper. They're taking everything away from me. They're taking away my excitement. And here I am in a doctoral program and I'm getting ready to actually do things and be able to create a dissertation that could possibly change the way that we are in community with each other. And my first thing was that person was just bumming my trip. We are assigned rooms. I go into the bathroom. I hear some noise. I come out, and who is there standing in front of me? You. And it was at that moment I knew that God does work in mysterious ways, and sometimes God works really, really fast. And I had to sit with my bias. I had to sit with my own prejudice against you in that moment where I was like, this is really awkward. It's not fun at all. But then we were able to spend that entire week together. And I got to know you. You know, I got to know what it was like when you hear loud noises and the things that you hear that I don't hear. And then realize that I was viewing you with the deficit when it was actually a damn superpower that I wasn't aware of. And then,
go team autism spectrum.
Yes, and then that's where it all started. But I constantly have to check my bias and how I'm actually acting and being around other people, because that's not creating community. It goes, you know, so there's a lot of learning and a lot of love. And oh, I still learn so much from you, Megan. Oh my goodness, my heart. I'm kind of like getting a little teary-eyed now.
I know this is what happens when we're together. We get super excited and then we cry. And then we get super excited and then we cry.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there's a lesson in that.
Yeah, well, and it's sometimes that if you, instead of, well, here's the way I would say it, is part of doing this work is sitting with the agitation. When I started doing these town halls, I was checking in with folk, particularly checking with the folk whose answer was, I could never speak at a forum like that because of these issues that still exist within the church. And if I was recorded, here's the consequences that it might be. So I wanted to hear some of that feedback privately from folk. And one of the people that I checked in with said, what we really need is someone to take some licks. So many people are afraid to have conversations like this and ask the wrong questions publicly and in a recorded way. And that prevents other people from doing work like this because they're nervous that they're going to make some mistakes. And they said, so if you're going to do this, if you're going to host these town halls, I want you to like make some mistakes publicly. And when you do the wrong thing, apologize and do it the right way. And so I think that's exactly what you just told in your story, is that sometimes you have to butt up against where your implicit bias is or your explicit bias is, and then sit with it. And then it might turn out that that person's your best friend forever because you took the time to like sit with it.
Right, exactly.
But that's I think what faith communities are for. And I'm not talking about abusive dynamics. I'm not talking about dynamics where it's not currently possible for people to understand that one behavior is harassing another group or oppressing another group in an active way. In that case, boundaries are appropriate and essential.
Yes.
But in cases where you just need to kind of pause a bit and have some aloha time, right? Some face-to-face breathing and some words or some mediation, that being someone who can sit in the uncomfortable until it changes and feels different is someone who can do some of that growth work. The other day, Dominique, who is 8, laid down on the kitchen floor in their underwear and said, "I can't eat breakfast, my bones or my legs are broken." Which was their way of saying, I'm growing really fast and my bones hurt, right? Because growth hurts and growth is hard and growth is uncomfortable. And it wasn't true that Dominique couldn't eat breakfast, but there is a way that like learning to just, like we just need to be that kid lying on the kitchen floor saying that it hurts and having it be okay to like lay there until a different thing happens, right? And that doesn't mean we gotta lay in the floor of some other communities, right? It doesn't mean we always do that in public or at someone else's space, but we do need to learn how to sit with the discomfort, I think.
Yep, absolutely. And I think, and then finding that place, right? Finding that place to where you can sit in the discomfort. Because I feel that as individuals, when we're going through that change, sometimes we fight against it and we can find ourselves just absolutely exhausted. And, you know, change exhausts you no matter what. But I think if we actually lean into it and take the time to be quiet, to meditate, to pray, to just sit. And I think that's why the ocean brings so much healing to me, because when I'm at the ocean, and that's my sacred place to be, right? When I'm at the ocean, I can see on how the world is so much bigger, and that what's happening to me in the moment, it's going to pass, just like with everything else, just as the waves ebb and flow, right? This too shall pass. And so it's like I've learned how to sit within that. And even though it's uncomfortable, I have to keep reminding myself that this too shall pass. And, you know, I mean, I remember, I remember that first time we met, and, you know, we went down to, you know, after we unpacked and I went down to dinner, I had to go down by the water because I had to sit with the fact that, how am I supposed to live with this person who in my head, I just thought, I've got to live with this person for a week. And then I'm like, okay, let's just make it happen. And then magic happened. Like magic literally happened, right?
Well, in that same, this is a lot of metaphors all in the same story, but that same week, I think like the ocean waves in Pacifica like broke through the glass of the room we were studying in. And for me, it makes me think of, there's this story in Christian tradition where there's this giant storm. So all of Jesus's disciples are fisher people, right? So they get water, they get when a storm is dangerous. It's not the ocean, it's the Sea of Galilee, which is kind of like a lake, but the waves get really big, right? So there's this terrifying storm and all these fisher people think that they're going to die. Jesus, who's a carpenter and not someone who hangs out in boats, is like not worried about the storm at all and is asleep, right? So they wake Jesus up and they're like, dude, we're dying. And he's just like, why are you waking me up, right? Like, why are you bothered by this storm? And then Jesus says, peace, be still, and quiets the storm. And it always kind of was like this story where I was like, what is going on? Like, why wouldn't God care when we're in the midst of turmoil? Like, right? That's what I would think right now in the middle of all of these disasters. But if I think about it in terms of this anti-racism work that we're doing, this anti-bias work that we're doing, then maybe Jesus knows on the other side of the storm, if you live through it, you always know you've lived through it, right? You don't need God in flesh and bones to come and protect you from it. Or if you learn to sit in that awkward, like, right, that sitting in the storm, being able to sleep in the storm so that you have energy for what happens next, and not feeding into it, like not feeding into the drama, like that's some next level kind of Zen stuff, to be able to, if you read the story from that lens of like doing anti-racist work, which I think is really an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, and I think with anti-racist work, it's the beauty of it is you don't shy away from it, right? You acknowledge it, and when you're able to call that within yourself, then that's where healing can happen. It's like removing the thorn. You're not just going to go ahead and put a Band-Aid over it and expect it to heal. You've got to remove the thorn first. And that's pretty much the way that, the way that I see it, right? It's like we have this opportunity to engage in this critical work, in this work that can actually bring us to this place where we have never seen before, that we've never experienced. But we've got to be able to acknowledge the fact that we've been conditioned to have these biases. We know that it exists, we're aware of it, and now we can do something about it instead of ignoring it and causing us to write policies on our bias and our prejudice and our discrimination and practices, and all of these things is based off of our bias. We've got a lot of things to unpack. We've got a lot of things to unpack. And when we unpack those things, it can be very uncomfortable, because then we're looking backwards and we're like, oh, this is what I was told. This is what I was given. Oh my goodness, right? And then it's like, okay, well, here I am right now. What does it look like going forward? And I feel in this time when we can be quiet and we can actually live in aloha, we have the opportunity to heal 7 generations, the 3 back, 3 forward, and myself as well too, right? So we have this opportunity when we are aware of our bias, and we know that it shapes us, but it doesn't have to be the way that we create our world, right? We could do other things with that. So yeah, there's just a lot when we're addressing bias and aloha.
Will you say more about how we can heal 3 generations back and 3 generations forward?
Yes. So the way that I feel is that when I look back, I can see my ancestors that have gone through a lot of pain, a lot of trauma. In my lineage, I have Hawaiian, Chinese, Filipino, Spanish, and Portuguese. So I have the Philippines that was colonized by the Spaniards for over 400 years. But yet in my ancestry, I have Filipino and Spanish. So I'm the colonizer and the colonized right now in this moment, right? But I can't, when I start talking about decolonization, I have to be able to go back and talk to my ancestors and be like, you guys did some fucked up stuff. But within all of that, I became this. So there is love there. There was something that happened. Now that I know that, I can take my healing and I can move forward in how I create the next generation, or how I help to create and form the next generation. So while I'm doing all of this, then I'm healing the generations that's here. I'm healing myself, and I'm ensuring that the next generation doesn't have to carry my trauma from the following generations. So that's how we heal ourselves. 3 generations back, 3 generations forward, and ourselves.
I love that way of thinking about it, because like this intergenerational trauma that we carry, sometimes we're able to name, sometimes we're not. Like one day, Laurel's family immigrated to the United States when her aunt was 8, and I think her dad was maybe 3, and from Hungary to flee the Holocaust. And so one day she was telling our kids not to play with the light switch because they would signal the Nazis. And I was like, whoo, there's some stuff going on there that's ancestral, and it hadn't been connected. And you would think that, like, I come from very kind of a privileged space. My family immigrated to South Dakota from Switzerland and Germany and England, sometimes through political upheaval, sometimes through famine and depression, and became farmers. Well, they didn't become farmers right away. They lived in barns and tried to work their way up to living in a home. But in all of the ways that folk immigrated to the United States, that's a pretty privileged way to immigrate. To think that, like, moving to the United States to live in a barn is a pretty privileged way of coming to the United States is unfortunate, but it's true. But within me, my family survived the Depression. My grandmother lived through the Depression. They actually moved from South Dakota to Oregon for a brief period of time and then moved back during the Dust Bowl. And so inside of me is this kind of assumption that insurance companies aren't gonna protect you and that going to the doctor isn't gonna matter because they're gonna give you fake medicine, and that who cares what you plant because it might just turn to dust tomorrow, right? And so there's this idea that you have to work hard, but your whole life can't be an identity that's in the earth that you're on, and you can't trust the company, right? And so I think some of our distrust of institutions comes out of that Depression level trauma that's a couple generations back that maybe some of us can't name. And so I think I've heard you explain this before, but can you talk a little bit about how people can do their own personal ancestral research to think about ways that they can heal their own trauma as a part of their anti-bias work?
Yeah, and it differs amongst people as well too, right? Because there's some individuals that don't know. They just don't know their ancestry. And then there's ways that we could do it now. You know, we have like those 23andMe, and you know, it's like on ancestry.com. We have ways where we can actually trace something, but I feel that it's I think there's a lot more legitimacy, I feel, is when you are able to engage with your elders, if you have any elders. I have the privilege and the opportunity to still have some of my elders that are alive. And so being able to sit with them and listen to stories about, you know, my father and my mother and my grandmother, I'm like, wow, I can gain a lot, something that I would not be able to do if I was to just read about them. So it's you know, I think that's one way that we're able to do our own work. And you know, sometimes unfortunately there's some people that just don't know. You know, they just don't know, and so they can have this sense of being an orphan and not knowing where to fit in. And I feel that's where it's so important that, you know, if you identify, you know, as a Norwegian, but you don't have any history that you can actually go back and talk to people, is that go to the museum, right? Like with my husband, he goes to the Norwegian museum, and he's like, I think this is where my family came from. And then people from that community, they should be able to create that relationship with them, where you can, you know, bring that person into your community and adopt that person. You know, I mean, there's so many different ways that we can actually do our research and find out exactly where we come from. But we're all indigenous to someplace. Yeah. We just need to figure out where.
When we researched my children's ancestry, because they're Black, there's only so far back that we could track, but also now Ancestry DNA can kind of pinpoint a part of the continent of Africa you might have come from when you were forcibly removed and sold into the United States. But I also want to encourage people not to just only research the traumatic parts of your ancestry, but to also research, if you are able to, some of the beautiful parts of your ancestry that you can draw strength from, because I know your ancestors give you a lot of strength.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I was able to do it. I did a talk in Norway, and I rented a car, and I was able to drive to the location where those farmers, I'm saying farmers in quotation marks, because they told everyone they were farmers so they could work their way out of the barn they were living in. But when I drove to the place where they lived, it was all rocks. And it was not possible to farm there. And so I asked the people nearby, I said, my family's from here. And they said they were farmers, and everyone laughed. So I learned that my family, when they immigrated to the United States, had kind of fibbed a bit to be able to save their own lives. And that's not a story we ever would have known without traveling to that location. And then this is Bruder Klaus, my 16th great grandfather, patron saint of Switzerland. And so I got to travel to Switzerland and learn all about that part of my family and see like the two chapels that are for him, and to dwell in the idea that you could be much more sacred and blessed than you ever imagined,
right.
I think can be a wonderfully healing place as well. So you can heal yourself by learning the good stories or the things that trickle down that might be the, you know, if you're related to folk who fought in the military, maybe the heroism that you feel with trickling down, or like let some of the good trickle down as well to empower you to do some of this work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I mean, when we think about it, and that's one of the things is that when I ask people, or when people are looking back at their ancestry, you know, I want to engage in conversation because I want to know, what did you find out? You know, where'd you come from? Right. It's like, I always, when my grandsons, talk about their identity, right? It's like, I've taught them to talk about the fact that, they come from a land of warriors and scholars and navigators and philosophers. Right? It's like we come from the land of monarchy, of kings and queens. That's where I came from. And it is within my DNA, right? It's within my DNA. And it does. I feel that we carry our ancestors within all of us. That who we are right now, the knowledge that we have right now, you know, sometimes people are like, gosh, you were born with that. And you're like, you damn right I was, because of these people back here, right? And so I feel that whenever, and you can attest to this, right? Whenever I walk into the room, I bring 300 of my ancestors with me.
And they're always drumming.
always. But yeah, there's so much beauty in all of this. We've got to be able to just be able to see it.
All right, so that's a lot of good ways that people can kind of work individually.
Yeah.
What are some things that they can do in their local faith communities?
That's a really good question, because, you know, it's like I think it's still the same, where the community needs to be aware of its bias. I think from that point, also ask the question of how inclusive are we being, right? It's like, let's talk about inclusivity. Are we being inclusive? And then to look around, like, who do we have in our congregation, in our community, and why? Why do we only have these people? Right? I ask a lot of my white friends, how many Black friends do you have, or people of color do you have as friends? You know, let's start there, right? Because, and ask yourself, why is it that I don't have any friends of color? Or even with my friends of color, you know, who are you running around with, right? You know, who's your posse? Let's start there. So I think even as it goes into the bigger community, I think the questions are still the same. Is, are we aware of our bias, and how are we being inclusive? Are we also judging each other? You know, it's like based off of the fact that we've created this little bubble with, you know, and is that really community when we cut people off, right? When people come to our doors and everything, are we going to be a community to where we're going to let them in, or we're going to ask for a resume and a blood test, right? How are we being in community together? How are we communing together? So
I would add,
think,
in faith communities, I would add to that question, who are we serving and who are we letting serve us? Because I've also seen in some communities where there's a large amount of diversity, that sometimes that diversity is in people being served.
Yep.
But there are very few opportunities for people to give back who are diverse, ways that they can participate in stewardship, right? And that's not, I mean, it's not every congregation, but there are some congregations where it's like the diversity we have is in our janitorial staff, but not in our pastors.
Right.
And that's a step, like that's people trying, but how can we have the folk making decisions about money and keys be as diverse as those who show up on the day that, you know, there's free turkeys or whatever the things are that are happening in a church space.
Exactly. Exactly. It's the same thing with, it's the same with all organizations, right? Even like with the school district, it's like being the first woman of color on the administration team at the district office. It was like, hello, what's going on here? Why is it that I don't see anybody that look like me? I mean, it's like asking those questions. And then it's like, and if you are bringing someone in, are you tokenizing them? Are you like, I want to look like I'm being diverse, so it's going to be performative, but we're not going to really treat them the same way.
Or it's okay, we hired Gerry. Gerry's going to take care of the equality while we keep doing our work the same way we've always done it.
Right, exactly. So I think that's how congregations can decrease bias.
Do you think it helps to bring in like so we have a thing called pulpit supply, which is when like the pastor is away, we pay someone to be like the preacher for the day. Do you think it helps to bring in diverse people during those times? Do you think it's tokenism? What do you think about that, of trying to bring in diverse people in those ways?
See, I think the way that I would see it is that if you're bringing in a diverse voice, if that individual wants to be there, and you're paying that person to be there, then I think that's fine. I think that's great, because then also it brings awareness to, why don't we have a person like this all the time? Why is it that they're only coming on special occasions? What's going on with that, right? And so it's bringing awareness. It's helping to become aware of your bias and your inclusivity, right? So I think it can work in all kinds of different ways. But I think so. Can I be one?
Yeah. You'd be okay preaching? All right.
I don't know. I mean,
or like a consultant. I think so.
Yeah.
I think you'd fit in.
You think so?
Here's another question. This might be a hard question. You might not. So prepare your face.
Prepare my face.
Gerry's very emotive on her face. Okay, so Gerry, in the Lutheran Church, we do a lot of things because we love diversity and we love diverse cultures, but having been called out by Pew Research as the whitest of all of the faith communities, it is sometimes a problematic thing when we pick hymns that are all in a particular language that maybe those who are in the community don't sing. I told you to prepare your face. So there are some times, because we want to be more diverse, where we will pick hymns of other cultures that are not present in the worship service or in the leadership of the worship service. Sometimes at church gatherings, I'm trying to say this in a way that doesn't feel like I'm bringing anyone down. I'm not talking about any group or any meeting specifically. Sometimes at our mostly white gatherings, we will bring in diverse groups to sing for us while we eat dinner, or to do cultural dances for us while we eat gala-style meals. The idea is to learn more about these cultures, but can you speak to us about if there are better ways we can do this, and what's problematic about doing things like that?
Give me a minute.
Yeah, we're doing it out of the goodness of our hearts.
Yes.
And out of trying.
Yes. And out of whiteness.
Yes. Yes.
So the cultural appropriation and the tokenism is real in that. It's like it's like we're not performers, it's like, and I'm just speaking as a Pacific Islander, when I see or I hear individuals calling me to be like, hey, do you have some hula dancers that we want you to come and do this thing? And I was like, and it's like, what is it that you want them to do? But then they only give or support that community in a way where it's like, oh, we went ahead and did we invited them over and we paid them a lot of money, and it's like, but you see that the community is, you know, possibly needing more, but you're not there. It's like, it's not being, I don't think it's being a community. It's like putting an ornament on a tree, right? It's like, it's not, you're not inviting them to be part of the tree, just a little pretty piece of it. And, you know, I mean, it's not window dressing. And I feel that's what happens, you know, and there's definitely better ways to do that. You know, it's like, invite them to be part of your congregation, invite them to be part of your family, you know? And so that way it's like, that's when you're having real and true cultural sharing, is that you're not just inviting them to be in a place where you're eating, you're inviting them to the table and to be part of the conversation. So maybe invite them to be part of the congregation. And if you don't have anyone of that culture in a congregation, don't be calling anybody else in to learn about your own first. And then invite other people to come in. That's so sad. Well, you know what I mean.
Well,
But
yeah, so it comes out of a place that the places who have financial resources want to be able to share financial resources with other spaces. As a part of the LGBTQ community in the church, here's the way I'll say it. The gay men's chorus has been invited to sing more often than gay pastors have been allowed to speak from the pulpit at some of our bigger meetings. And so I do understand how it's like a step in the door towards something you want to be able to do in the future, but it's one of the number one questions we get on this town hall forum is, how can we celebrate cultures in a better way? And it's hard, right? It's hard because I think what you're saying is that the celebration shouldn't be just one day, maybe shouldn't even be 1 month. But if there's a community that you want to be a part of, I think it comes down to going to their events for a while. It comes down to sharing resources after asking, what do you need?
right, right.
And it comes down to honoring more than just the artistic pieces that are pretty, but being able to sit with communities during the dirty, messier parts.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's how you create allyship as well too. Right? It's like you want to be allies with each other. You want to be able to be in community with each other, not just to go to someone because you want entertainment or you want something from them. It's like, where's the community to where it's reciprocal, right? There needs to be reciprocity, not just one is going to benefit and the other one's not, even though it's like, oh, well, we gave them money to do that. You know, I mean, that's something that's going to come and go. You got to be sustainable and be able to, you know, I mean, it's like, you know, it's like weaving that sweater, is that they are being able to, they're being intertwined into everything else.
And it takes time, right?
It does. It
It's
definitely
not a
takes
checklist
time.
necessarily.
Exactly. And, you know, I mean, it's like going to each other's events. If you're invited, don't just go there if you're not invited. So, you know, but it's like, it's being able to create a bigger space with, you know, and it's okay that if you still have your own space, because your own space is sacred. And that's why I feel when you have caucus groups, right, it's like you break people up, is that we process things differently, we navigate the world differently. And so it's okay to have our separate spaces, but I feel that if we want to learn from one another, we've got to be able to do it together and not in silo. And so, yeah, there are definitely different ways of making this happen.
Make some friends.
Make some friends. Yes.
Make some friends. Show up.
Yep.
Do a lot of listening.
Yep.
And takes more than just a dinner, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sing the hymns from other cultures. Don't sing the hymns from other cultures.
No, don't sing the hymns from other cultures, because you might fuck it up, and then that's going to be a disgrace. You don't want to do that. I mean, I remember. Okay, so my nephew's going to be so upset that I'm sharing this story, but I told him that I'm going to share it anyway. So my nephew, who graduated, he graduated from a high school in California. And I went to, and it was a small little town up over in Sacramento. And I went to the graduation, and the president, the student president, was, she said something in Hawaiian, right? Till we meet again. And it's ahui ho kako, right? She said it ahui hao cacao.
She wanted chocolate.
And I'm sitting up in the bleachers, and I'm looking at, you know, it's like their program, and I see it there, and I was like, what is going on? What's happening? And I'm looking around, and I was like, is there people from Hawaii here? Where are they? Where's my people? Their language is right here, right? I'm getting excited. I'm like, oh my gosh, my people are here in this small little town. And I'm looking around, and there's nobody that looks like me. Nobody that looks like me. And then down on the field, there's these students wearing leis, plastic leis. And she goes up and she says, ahui hao cacao. And I was like, I felt like I got stabbed in the stomach, right? I felt like, oh no, this isn't it. And you know, I was a little loud when I said that, and I got a little dramatic in the bleachers, and other parents were turning around, and in fact, my sister-in-law was like, it's their kids. And I was like, okay, I get it that they're kids, but that's my culture. And someone else said that it's okay. They got it from Disney. They got it from Lilo and Stitch, which even hurt more. And I'm like, no. So right there, using someone else's culture, not even bringing in someone that represents that culture. You took something, you stole something. And you know, that's something that we just don't want to do, right? Especially for BIPOC people. We've had so much already that's been appropriated from us that it hurts. It really does hurt. So don't do that. It just hurts. Don't sing the hymns, Megan. Don't do it.
Don't put Gerry in that position. That's why I told you about your face. I've been there when Gerry's mad someone said something in Hawaiian wrong.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not good.
So what I'm taking from that story is that forgiveness might be a part of all of this. Like, because we've all like stepped out of the bounds. We've all like said the Hawaiian wrong once or twice, right? Like, I'll sometimes text Gerry a picture and say, can I wear this outfit? And Gerry always says no. But I just think that like, Maya Angelou has this great quote that's like, do the best you can until you know better, right? And so maybe that's what uncovering implicit biases is, the knowing better part. And so if there are people who did do those things, who did sing those songs, who did celebrate communities in those ways, like, give yourself some forgiveness, and then next time, maybe don't, right? Here's a question though. How many folk need to be present for it to be authentic?
How many folk needs to be present to be authentic?
Right. So like if there were more Hawaiian folk in those bleachers, or if she had said the words correctly, like when is there like a numerical point that it becomes okay to like use that stuff?
I think if there were students that was there, if she was Hawaiian, then that would have been great. That would have been great. Now sometimes it's like, you know, again, people are mixed, right? So if there were Hawaiians in the group, she was Hawaiian, maybe she presented white. That's my own bias that I've got to check. And she said the words correctly, then that would be fine. But if you're just doing it because you saw it on Disney and you thought that it was cool and you wanted to take that, then no, you should not do that.
Okay, so here's a question from one of our viewers. Okay, I'm just going to read it the way it's written. This is such a hard rule in the midst of worship online when singing can only be done by individuals, because it's hard to sing in a choir now, from a distance or pre-recorded, and is a conversation we are having in my context. What are your thoughts on a congregation that has done the work of learning the stories of the songs and now is only doing pre-recorded worship with the white music staff providing music?
So let me see if I got this straight. So they did research on the people, on the group, and now they're singing the songs in white spaces.
No, I assume that they maybe have diverse folk. They just
Okay.
can't, they just aren't the like one who also plays the piano or the organ. Like they're not the instrumentation person necessarily. And so because not everybody wants, like some people feel comfortable singing in a choir with lots of people, but they don't want to be a soloist, right?
Okay.
And so it takes a lot of tech work to try to have more than one voice sing together. So imagine a community where maybe there's some diversity, but the only person recording the song is the white musician. What are your thoughts about that?
Because they couldn't have anybody else from that culture? Is that it? They couldn't find anyone?
Maybe,
They
or
didn't have.
that's, yes. Priscilla says yes.
So it's like if you've done research on these people, you know that you could probably find someone of that culture, right? I mean, it's like, I think here's one of the things.
Because it's pre-recorded, it might be a little different if you could reach out to people who could record it for you, right? Maybe not thinking of each song as having to be done. Like you could have a person of that community sing that song one time and use the video more than once.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Is that
yes.
kind of what you're saying, is maybe consider trying to find a person from that culture
right,
who could record
exactly.
it for you?
Right. And then pay that person. Honor that person, pay that person.
It'd be nice to come from a congregation where there's just money lying around to pay people to record stuff. But I do think that's a best practice, and that's what we're talking about today, right?
Yep, exactly.
They said that's helpful. Very good. All right, so let's shift now to thinking about like larger institution level. So in church institutions, there's like bishops, they make decisions and policies about things, they provide resources typically. And when I say typically, I mean almost always in English, and almost always, like there's a special section on the ELC website for when they're talking about communities of color or when they've written something together. So it's not assumed to be a part of everything. And we have, again, the Pew Research that says we're the whitest denomination of all the denominations. What ideas do you have for like a larger church body like that? Or, you know, I mean, maybe that's the equivalent of like a school board that's thinking about multiple schools.
Yeah. Well, if you're sending things out, first of all, Google Translation works really, really well. You can actually do that, and it goes into multiple languages. But then, of course, again, asking yourself, you know, who are you serving? Who are you serving? And, you know, and why is it only white people, right? I mean, my brain automatically goes from this institution to structural, right? It's like, I'm like thinking, okay, how was this all created in the first place? You know, who was it created for? And, you know, it's like, start asking those questions on how can we actually change that? I mean, just because something was given to us a long time ago, that doesn't mean that we have to stick with it right now. I mean, this is 2020, we have the opportunity to change things. And so, of course, whenever I talk about, you know, making that change, it's like I can see that, you know, the hair in the back of people's necks stand up like, oh, change. We've been doing this all the same way all the time. Well, if you're going to keep doing the things the same way, you're going to get the same results. So how are you going to be talking about diversity and equity and bias if you're not going to be able to change your bias or anything like that? You're just going to end up with the same thing. So yeah, that's how. But whenever I look at structure or institution, I also look at, you know, going down, is that who's running those institutions, who's running, you know, who's making up those structures. And then it starts with individuals. It always goes back to the individuals. And, you know, it's like What are you doing for yourself? Asking yourself the question. And so if we as a collective was able to change and to shift the way we look at things, then the way that our institutions are built and the structures are in place would change as well too. But we've got to start now. If we want to see something different for the next generation and next year and everything else, then I think it would be a good time for us to do the change right now. What is this that you just popped up on my screen?
I made a poll for people, and people can say how they think change works in the church. Does it happen from bishops? Does it happen from congregations? Does it happen from personal change? So we can find out how they think things change.
There's not one on there that says collectively. We all have to change.
There's an other where I recommend, because Gerry told you that's the right answer, that you type in collectively.
Oh, that's cool.
I was
gotta learn
thinking
how to do that.
I'll teach you later. I was thinking, I mean, we've talked about this before, but like, because we're inside and we're online, there's going to be a point in time, if it hasn't already happened in your community yet, where people get to slowly start going back to communal spaces, where we get to redefine how that happens. And so, like, there's been a period of time where our church has been closed and locked and nobody can go in. So as people start being allowed to go in, maybe only 12 get to go in at a time, and then 25, and then 100, we have to start to think about how we reopen, how we share our buildings, if we can also be opening our spaces to a wider diversity of folk than maybe were there before we closed them all. It's kind of like an Etch-a-Sketch reset of our buildings, is like, as we're trying to think about how to live in this kind of post-COVID world, it could give us an opportunity to go to some of our neighbors and say, our sanctuary is very large. You have a group that currently meets in a small room. Would you like to share our building for a period of time so that you could, be more distanced apart, as a way of starting a conversation, not out of the assumption you're going to be together forever, but just practice what it feels like for your faithful space to start opening up to the community. Like, literally, it's like, so open your heart individually, open your local congregations by seeing who's there and who's not there, but then also thinking about opening your buildings and who's utilizing your buildings and why they're utilizing the building, right? And so I guarantee in most communities, there is like a Rotary Club. In San Francisco, we have lots of them, and some of them are specific to different cultures and different languages, right? That group that does speeches, when they start to open back up, is going to need a bigger room than they might have rented in the back of a restaurant before.
Yep.
We have a podium and a sound system and could make space for those groups. But if we only make space for the groups that resemble us or who have a past history with our congregations, we've lost an opportunity to intentionally open our building doors to folk that could make our spaces look more diverse. Because I think there's a thinking that Sunday morning has to be diverse because Sunday morning is somehow more important than the rest of the time in our building. But I think if we started by having the weekly use of the building be diverse, that's at least a first step.
Right.
Would it feel better to you if a group came and sang at a worship service that's of a different culture than the congregation, if every Wednesday and Thursday there was a joint program that happened in the building, right? Where there's other ways that group is connected? Does that feels different?
I did. Yes. Yeah. Right. I think that's great. It's kind of like courting one another, right? It's like courting. You've got to like get to know each other and everything like that. You come together and then, you're sharing with one family on who you are and you share with the other family. And then it's like then you come together to celebrate that union, because I think that's great. I just turned an entire thing into like a marriage.
Hey, if the metaphor works, it's okay. Well, the church has
I
been
know,
using marriage
I know.
metaphors for a long time.
And I'm sure by now everybody figured out that I speak in metaphor. That's my superpower, is that I speak in metaphor.
Yes, metaphor and stories of ancestors. Absolutely.
Metaphor and story of ancestors, and connecting with the animals as well too.
I would say, like, so if a congregation was going to start opening their doors kind of in new ways post-COVID, and then maybe have some cultural exchange out of doing that, one thing that people would want to pay attention to is if folk like me remain the landowners, right, and the building owners, and there's not a new way of, like, if the building committee is only people who look like me and does not reflect the full diversity of people who are utilizing the space, that can replicate some of the historical power struggles that have happened in history.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so I would think that's another thing you'd have to navigate as you're trying to work through stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, things, I think that's the beauty of change, right? It's constant. It's the only, I mean, that's the only thing that's constant in life is change. And as we move past all of this COVID, and we start to, open our buildings and look at different ways on how we build community, then power and leadership needs to shift and change as well too. So then that way you don't just have a hierarchy of just white people, right? It's like, okay, yeah, this is what I'm doing. And then it comes out to be where you end up with that savior complex. And I don't think anybody wants to do that, right? Is I have that savior complex. It's like, okay, we're working in community with each other. And so everything's going to change. The entire landscape of how we are in community with each other is going to change. And we've got to be open to that. We've got to be open to that.
What are your thoughts about, so, well, here's what I'll raise. So a lot of the spaces where colonization happened in Christian ways, right? Like Captain Hook wasn't just coming out to Hawaii in order to colonize it.
Did you say Captain Hook?
Isn't it? No, not Cook. It's
No, you said, I thought you said Hook. It is Cook. I thought you said Hook.
Yeah, sorry.
Peter Pan.
It's because I have the hat on, like I'm the pirate. Yeah, so
Okay.
Captain Cook, when he comes to Hawaii, he goes to Australia as well, right? And he is colonizing. He's not just doing it in the name of the countries he represented, he was also doing it in the name of a Christianity that he represented, and trying to change people's religion in those paths, right? And so a lot of the harm that has been inflicted on indigenous cultures has come out of colonization and has come out of ways that Christian perspectives have forced brutal change in people, basically believe this or die genocide kind of mentality in a lot of places. Are there ways that you have seen that are effective, that folk who are carrying their faith can express to others regret or lament, or what are some of the, are there ways in which folk whose faith tradition comes out of a genocide tradition can seek to atone from that history or untangle from that history, or whatever it is that needs to continue happening in the world?
That's a big question. That's a big question.
I thought I'd ask it right at the end so that you have like a time frame.
It's and it's deep as well too, right? Because it's like you have a lot of those, you have a lot of the trauma. But I feel that if we want to have healing, and if we want to live in a society, and I'm always looking at, my grandsons and the next generation, right? I'm always looking at, okay, I don't want them to live in a society where they'll be carrying the traumas of the past. And it's happened to people from Hawaii, and because I'm part Hawaiian, right? It's like the colonization, the forcing of Christianity onto my people, where, you know, it's like we have to stop the hula, we have to stop our language, right? It's like all of those things came out of that. And there's a lot of hurt. There's definitely a lot of hurt from that. I feel that there is a place of forgiveness that can, and atonement that can happen in that, but it begins with yourself first, right? It's like, I understand and I know that this is what happened and how it happened, and sometimes just thinking about it, I can feel that tinge, I can feel that pain, and sometimes it can be hard to look at that pain in the face and be like, this is what has happened to my great grandmother, right? I feel, but when I also think about aloha and the way that our queen, you know, when she said that all she wanted was to stop the killing of her people, to me, what she was saying was, even though that there is, you know, there is this these colonizations that came out of religious ways, that we still have to forgive. We had to find that place to forgive, just as Christ has forgiven us. And it's it can be really difficult, but we also can't say that we forgive but then still cause harm, because then it becomes performative. And I think it's a personal journey when it comes to finding atonement, and then being able to acknowledge that it did happen and it's not going to happen again. I think that's where we can find true forgiveness and healing, is that we acknowledge that it happened and it's not going to happen again. So yeah, I don't know if I even answered that. That was a big question, Megan.
I know. But
that was a big one.
You are a holder of big questions. What do we do in times like these when it seems like it might happen again?
Oh,
I mean, sorry to
yes,
say it,
I know,
but I don't like,
right.
if authentically I'm supposed to say, I'm sorry that happened and I'm not going to let it happen again, it feels disingenuous given like what's happened with Mauna Loa, right? Given what's still happening in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I can honestly say that right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to do it on purpose,
right,
but
right.
that doesn't hold as much weight.
Right. Exactly. And, you know, I mean, it's like Mauna Kea is where, you know, the just the decimation of the sacred lands up over in Mauna Kea.
Because I'm just gonna say I'm gonna say all the words wrong.
It's okay. It's
because the story was talking about cacao, so I'm thinking of all of my favorite macadamia nut desserts now.
Yeah. but I think
my apologies.
with what's happening and the decimation of the sacred grounds, I feel that when you listen to the stories, when you're able to listen to the stories and you're able to see and feel the pain of these individuals, you know, especially these communities, then I feel that there should be some kind of compassion and empathy on the other side, and start asking ourselves the question, is this something that we really want to do? Right? And of course, a lot of times what's happening in Mauna Kea, they're doing it in the name of science. Right? This is what we want to do. We want to be able to see the stars. Well, you know what? My ancestors looked at, when they wanted to see the stars, all they did was look up. That's all they needed to do. Right? And so it's like, let's question those things. Let's interrogate, you know, all of those practices and why. Get down to it, get down to the heart of it. But the only way that we're able to do that is to engage in aloha, is to engage in this kind of sacred dialogue, because you're never going to be able to hear anything if you're not going to engage the heart. And I feel that's where we need to go. That's the direction, is to engage our hearts. I think it was
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think it was the Dalai Lama that said, no matter what is going up, never give up, develop develop the heart. Too much energy in your country is spent on developing the mind, right? And so it's like, in developing the heart, we're able to be more compassionate for everyone. And I feel that that's when we can actually enjoy and understand and really know what it feels like to have hope and peace, is by being compassionate and to one another. But again, it all starts with addressing your bias and being able to talk about it. Be courageous enough to step into that space of discomfort, and to, and to also acknowledge that if someone is going through transformation and you can see that, is to let them go through their own transformation as well too. Be able to hold that space, just as we want everyone to hold space for us.
Yeah, and then maybe it goes back to that story of like meeting me, is like, yeah, there are times that people are going to screw up, but like sitting in a longer journey is like, I think you know this already, is like, I'm dyslexic. I see names, I see words as shapes. And so I'm going to screw them up, and you're going to have to pull out whatever alphabet soup I'm talking about, but my brain's not going to necessarily be able to do that work. And learning the ways that people have their own, the ways that they excel, the places where they might have visible or hidden disabilities, the places where they're mightily trying but aren't quite there yet, is all a part of that long journey of just sitting with each other and trying to figure it out. And one of the ways that we shape our hearts in the Lutheran tradition is through prayer. And I'm not going to ask you to lead us in prayer, although that would be fun. But I am going to ask you if there are things that you see as needing prayer in this world that our communities can lift up. Because we do something called Prayers of the People, where diverse folk get to say, like, this is the thing I'm noticing that needs some of God's attention right now, that needs healing and hope and light. What are the things you're noticing from the perspective of the individual that is you, or from the communities that you are knit from?
I think it's the racial injustices that is happening right now in our world. It's being, I think right now we need a lot of prayer because of this racial divide, that we are at war with each other because of our phenotype, because of the color of our skin. And I feel that's where a lot of the people that are doing this work, being able to pray for them, for strength, for perseverance, I think that's I know that's one thing that I need every single day, is that being able to keep doing the work. A lot of the light workers out there that are just working towards holding light and, shining light on this world right now, because it does seem so dark. And it's metaphorically, and actually it really is right now, right? It's like, that's what's happening. And we need more light workers in our world. Pray for the ones that is working towards bringing peace and compassion and grace. But yeah.
I like it. Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you think we should touch on? Or did we solved everything?
I think so. We talked a lot about we talked a lot about everything. But see, this is why we would like stay up. I miss those days. I miss staying up and jumping on your bed and, because I saw a red fox or an eagle. Megan, you gotta check this out. Guess what I saw? Yes.
I think we had another question put in here. Okay, in a small town in a small congregation of fewer than 40, we have one person of color married to a white person and 2 LGBTQ members. They have been asked to have served in leadership. We have a very small pool. I sometimes wonder if we could do more if our congregation joined with another. Thank you for this discussion about using people. What do you have thoughts for communities that are really small, there isn't a lot of diversity to pull from, how can folks support the diversity that is within them
I like
in
that.
those situations?
I like that they talked about actually joining in with another congregation, right? I mean, yeah, that's great. And you know, I mean, I hear that a lot on where, you know, where whenever I walk into an organization and it's like I see a lot of white people and I'm like, where's your people of color? We don't have much to pull from. What are you talking about? Look at the status, the statistics on how many people of color live right within your vicinity. There are people that you can pull on. Go into the communities, right? Go into the communities, talk to people, go out there and be vulnerable. You know, it's like, be transparent, be like, hey, you know what? This is who we are. This is what we want to do. There's tons of places that we can pull from. Of course, we have to, and then maybe instead of just in that small community, you go into the boundaries, you go into the margins of different communities. So then that way you can serve the different populations around you.
Well, the question had an addition that was added to it, saying that the community might be tired, that there is some diversity around in the neighborhood, but that the community might be tired, which for me, I translate into some of our Lutheran congregations are older congregations. They've done this work for a lot of decades, and sometimes people are just
tired,
worn out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess my suggestion for that, you tell me what you think about this suggestion, is young folk in every generation are very passionate about stuff. They are full of energy and full of life. It might feel chaotic because it might not be organized or financially viable or any of the things that feel safer. But if you are tired, you could reach out to groups that are full of life and who are not tired, and simply offer free space if you have the luxury, financial wise, to have free space for younger, passionate groups, and see what happens when people who are not tired are in your building. And it's risky, right? It's risky. Because offering free space to groups might leave a mess, and whatever shifts is going to be a shift. But I do think that there are ways that people could specifically reach out to groups that have energy.
Oh,
what do you think about that?
Oh, I love it. I love it. Because, you know, it's like when I do my work, I'm always on the, you know, lookout for the next generation, right? And I work with the next generation and I mentor the next generation. And then it's like, because there's going to come a time when I'm going to be like, Auntie is tired. You need to step up and take over this because I'm tired. And so it's like, it's about passing it on, right? It's passing it on to the next generation. But sometimes I feel that we get so caught up in having these positions where we don't want to give it up. We feel that we're going to lose part of ourselves if we give it up or if we hand it over to someone else. To me, it's the extension of your legacy, right? It's like, if you want to go ahead and live forever, go pass it on to the next generation, because the stories that they tell about you is what's going to live on forever. You're not, but your stories will. And so, yeah, that's kind of like what I think. That's a great idea on, you know, it's like, and this next generation is coming up. They're vibrant, they're brilliant. Their brains they just work so fast, right? And they have these amazing ideas. I love it. I love it. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's my suggestion, just because I think that what I think is the beautiful time that we live in is that folk who care deeply about gender issues and race issues, who cared about these things when they were teenagers, when they were in that sweet spot of like, I care my whole life about this. The people who now have grayer hair, if they let it go that way, who are in charge of the keys of churches, who are in charge of the policies and the decision making of churches, cared about the exact same things as the young people these days care about. the language is different, the landscape might be
Yes.
different, but the
Yep.
issues are so much the same.
Yes.
That rarely happens in history, where generations with resources and generations with youth and vitality have the same passions and could, become superheroes, to use your lingo on it, because folk get it, right?
Yep.
They don't have to explain it to people. And we live in a time where the oppression is so obvious. We don't have to waste all that time we used to have to use proving that it existed. Remember that?
Yeah.
Right now, everyone's like, oh yeah, it's everywhere, let's fix it, right? So we can skip a whole step of having to prove our discomfort to others and perform our discomfort. And so I think there's so much opportunity and hope in life. And I've seen that in the folk who have watched these town halls 16 weeks in a row and keep coming back to learn more each week. And so I'm grateful for all of you who have joined us. Gerry, I couldn't adore you more.
Oh.
And virtual hugs. I know it's so hard to be apart. Those who are watching on the Facebook live stream, I love you so much. Do you wanna say a closing in Hawaiian? I mean, since we're only allowed because you're here, you might as well.
Yeah, there is. And I might, actually my ancestors are pretty much saying to just say aloha. That's it. Yeah.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for
Aloha,
watching.
everyone.
Aloha.